Hello, Robert Bateman here, and welcome to this ever so slightly festive edition of the Privacy Corner. Now, when the GDPR tells you to notify people about the recipients or categories of recipients of personal data, which is it, the recipients or the categories of recipients? And does it matter if it's a privacy notice or the response to an access request? Well, the Dutch DPA weighed in on this issue this week in an enforcement action against Netflix that earned the company a €4.75 million fine. The Irish DPA has fined Meta a much larger sum of €251 million over a 2017 data breach. And the French DPA has written to website operators warning them about their non-compliant cookie banners. So let's start with the Irish case. This is about a data breach that Facebook became aware of in 2018, and it affected around 29 million Facebook accounts, 3 million of which were in the European Economic Area. And, well, it's quite a complicated background. Basically, it revolves around three features, one of which was new to Facebook in 2017, the View As feature. So this allows you to see your Facebook profile as others would see it. And we also have the Video Uploader feature and the Happy Birthday Composer feature. Some combination of uses of these three features generated a fully permission user token for a given account that would give people access to that account. This is a way that Facebook remembers your login details, essentially, so you don't have to enter them each time you use the website. And this was exploited in an automated fashion by attackers using scripts and led to the compromise of the 29 million Facebook accounts I mentioned earlier. So the Irish DPC said that this was a failure of data protection by design, data protection by default. No mention of Article 32 GDPR, the actual security obligations, but we do get the data breach notification and recording violations here. So they say Facebook or Meta did not properly document this incident, meaning that the investigation was harder, and they also didn't properly notify people about all the information required when giving a data breach notification. Now, interestingly, again, the Irish DPC put this decision through the Article 60 process at the EDPB, and there were no objections. Previously, under Helen Dixon, these decisions would take a very long time as the EDPB and the Irish DPC squabbled about what should be in it. Binding decisions would be issued, forcing the Irish DPC to make harsher penalties or make additional findings. This is not happening anymore under the DPC's new leadership. We've had several complaints sail through this EDPB process. So Des Hogan and Dale Sunderland, the joint commissioners that replaced Helen Dixon, are evidently taking a more collegiate approach with their fellow regulators and perhaps a harsher line on GDPR enforcement per se. Next up, Netflix. They received 2 complaints supported by NOIB, not something any company wants to receive. And this happened quite a few years ago, 2018. And the Dutch DPA has this week fined Netflix €4.75 million for transparency violations. They apologise that this took so long. I mean, compared to the Irish DPC, this is actually not a terribly slow-running investigation. But nonetheless, they found violations of Articles 5.1a, transparency, 12, about the types, the ways of giving transparency information, 12 and 13, privacy notices, 13 and 14, I should say, and 15, subject access requests. So the issues here were both with the privacy notices displayed on the TV when you log into Netflix or set up an account, and the requests for access, so responses to DSARs. And in both cases, the Dutch DPA found that Netflix did not give enough information. So they were missing stuff about purposes and legal basis, the recipients of personal data, as I mentioned earlier, we'll come back to that, the retention period of personal data, and data transfers. Not enough information about the actual countries to which Netflix transfers personal data. or the safeguards involved. So on the recipients issue, Article 13(1)(e) and Article 15(1)(c) both say that controllers have to tell data subjects the recipients or the categories of recipients of their personal data. This has been tested at the CJEU in the Austria Post case with regard to Article 15, where it was established that controllers have to tell people about the specific recipients of their personal data unless it would be impossible to do otherwise. We haven't had a court ruling about Article 13, which uses the same language. Now, the Dutch DPA says the same applies there. Controllers should be telling data subjects about the specific recipients of personal data in their privacy notices themselves. We also have retention periods here. The Dutch DPA criticised Netflix for saying that they would retain personal data for as long as required or permitted by legislation and regulations. They said that's too vague. You need to actually give the specific retention periods for different types of personal data. Netflix said, actually, Dutch DPA, your privacy notice says exactly the same thing. You also do not give specific retention periods. You just say you'll keep personal data for as long as required or permitted by regulation. The Dutch DPA said, don't worry about that. We're not talking about us. Your privacy notice doesn't say this, and it should do, so you violated the GDPR. And we fixed ours anyway, so don't worry about it. Interesting there that the Dutch DPA criticises a controller for something that it is allegedly guilty of itself. Finally, the CNIL, the French Data Protection Authority, has written to website operators saying that their cookie banners are not compliant with the GDPR's rules on consent. So we have a letter writing campaign here, a bit like the one that occurred in the UK at the end of last year. I would probably wager that the CNIL is more likely to follow up on its threats in these letters than the ICO was, because the ICO seemed to forget that it had threatened to publish the names of companies in January if they didn't bring their websites into compliance. So it's all pretty basic stuff here that these websites allegedly have not done or done. Basically, accepting and rejecting cookies should be equally easy on the cookie banner. So the CNIL calls out several specific types of dark patterns, as they're known, having a reject option that's a different color, font size, or font style from the accept option, making information not readily apparent, burying the reject option in text, and having multiple accept options but only one reject option. So these websites have got 1 month to comply with the CNIL's warning. They don't say what will happen if they don't, but the French DPA is quite tough on cookies, the toughest regulator in the EU for my money. So if I had received one of these letters, I would definitely make compliance a priority. That's all from me this week. Have a lovely Christmas if you celebrate such things. And thank you, as always, to Privado AI for supporting the show. And I'll see you all next time.